Hey everyone, I'm Pierre, he's Chris, and we are the Fantasy Football Endgame. We're going to help you again in week 4 with some of our favorite must-start running backs. It's all about building that winning lineup, of course, to help you win in fantasy football. Join our movement, try to build the best fantasy community out there. A lot of information. If you just check the description in the links that are down below after you're done watching this video, you'll see what I'm talking about. But let's get into it, Chris. Let's start with a running back that you like based on matchups heading into week 4.
Gotta like Joe Mixon this week. Not a guy I like a lot of times, has had a couple of down weeks, but you gotta feel good about Joe Mixon heading into week 4. He's had 18 or more carries in every single game so far. And yeah, he's lost some of that passing down work we saw in week 1 to Chris Evans, but that shouldn't matter this week. Going up against Jacksonville, he should have no problem against this defense. And, you know, if you look like last year, if you remember, a lot of people who had Joe Mixon were frustrated. He wasn't doing anything. And then he went out there against Jacksonville and put up a monster game. I don't know if he'll quite be that good this week against Jacksonville, but no reason to be worried about this matchup. No reason to be worried about Joe Mixon. Should be looking at 18, 20 plus carries against a bad defense. So you gotta love him in week 4.
Yeah, you know, they did give him a little bit of credit. They did put up somewhat of a fight in week 3, but still lost, by more than one score. So you're still streaming against Jacksonville every chance you get. Mixon is really not a streamer. He's a guy you got to plug in your lineup, I think, every week anyways, but especially this week. Now, Jonathan Taylor's a guy that pretty much you want to start every week. A lot of people, just like last year, getting a little bit worried. He's not putting up first-round production, that's for sure. And especially worried because Nyheim Hines, as he's been known to do, cutting into his touches, especially as a receiver. Taylor's actually a pretty good receiver. Why is Nyheim Hines getting the ball on these passing downs? Well, Nyheim Hines is one of the best receiving running backs in the game. PFF grade proves that. Now, Taylor's still very capable, but yeah, he's going to get pulled sometimes. So he is somewhat game script dependent, which sounds crazy, but it's true. There is a significant difference in Taylor's production when the Colts are tied or winning versus when they are behind. And so sometimes when you think it's going to be a Taylor game, it's not a Taylor game. It turns out, Wentz not 100%. Team couldn't really get going last week, and the Titans proved to be too much. Well, I have a feeling against my Dolphins this week, going to be a little bit easier for the Colts. It should still be a competitive game, but I think we're going to see more Taylor. And, he was actually efficient last week as far as his carries. He just didn't get enough of them. All right, he was averaging about 6 yards a carry on the ground, but they didn't go to him enough. And that's something that hopefully Frank Reich looks back on and changes this week, at least hopefully if you have Taylor on your team. You do. You started with confidence. I think he's a top 10 running back this week. The Dolphins so far giving up the second most rushing yards per game. Just got gashed by Peyton Barber, of all people. Chris, I know that pains you because he cost you a little bit of money in one league. That would be Peyton Barber. But look, Taylor is going to be a strong start this week. And just when we think Nyheim Hines is going to have relevance, I think he's not this week just because they're not going to need him as much. So bottom line, keep Taylor in. Don't panic. He'll be fine. All right, let's go to another guy that you like, Chris, who's another must-start running back.
Well, unfortunately, last week we lost Christian McCaffrey to injury again. Now, thankfully, it does not look serious at all, but almost certainly going to miss week 4 at least. And that opens the door for Chuba Hubbard. And this is a great spot for Chuba Hubbard going against this Dallas defense. Their front line is banged up. Guys got COVID. Guys are injured. No reason to think Chuba Hubbard can't put up high-end RB2 numbers, if not low-end RB1 numbers, because he's going to get the bulk of the carries, the bulk of the receptions out of the backfield. So if you're able to if you drafted Hubbard and had him on your bench, or if you're able to get him off of waivers this week, like Pierre said, our number 1 waiver pickup this week, you could feel great rolling him out in week 4 against Dallas. Like I said, I think he's going to put up high-end RB2, if not low-end RB1 type numbers.
Yeah, I mean, you're picking these guys up and you're using your top waiver claim or spending up fab. You're doing it to use them, right? If you have Hubbard, you have to roll them out. So there's no question there. Just don't expect him to be, last year's Mike Davis necessarily, but we'll see. All right, so speaking of cutting into the passing down work, well, nobody's doing that for David Montgomery, except for the fact that there is no passing work, there is no offense in Chicago. It's a mess. And I know that kind of feels like it kills everybody's value. And last week it did. There are no Bears that you wanted any part of in fantasy. And so a lot of people are worried that you just want to avoid this team completely. And I get that. Is Justin Fields really that bad? No, of course he's not. Look, it was his first start going against a pretty good Cleveland defense. And so the offensive line just imploded. The game plan wasn't good. Put a lot of that on the coaching staff. Look, this team is in trouble. I'm not saying that, but we do have to give them a little bit of faith, just a little bit. And I'm not saying in Justin Fields or the passing game, but David Montgomery, if they know it's good for them, if they are in any way smart, they will start with early and often giving David Montgomery the ball and establish the run to take pressure off of Fields, right? So it is also Detroit, and I know that's still a defense you want to stream against and start against every week if possible. So keep the faith in Montgomery. Don't have to have faith in the coaching staff. I know I don't. I don't think they're long for this season. But for now, Montgomery, keep him in at least for this week. And if everything goes south, well, then you panic and then you keep him on your bench, and then we'll see what happens in Chicago. All right, another running back, Chris, that you like in week 4.
Yeah, usually you would look at San Francisco and think, oh, can't start my running back against them. But I'm loving Chris Carson this week of the Seahawks going against San Francisco. This defense, for whatever reason, is struggling against the run. They're giving up they're ranked 24th, in yards against on the ground, giving up over 123 rushing yards per game. You know, Chris Carson isn't getting Joe Mixon or David Montgomery type workloads, but he's getting enough to be valuable, and he's always a threat to score. Yeah, I do wish he was catching a few more passes, but he gets enough work in the receiving game, to give you some PPR value. But again, against San Francisco, a defense that hasn't really been able to stop the ground game at all this year for whatever reason, you got to love Chris Carson this week in this matchup. These teams always play, tough, competitive, close games, so game script should be in his favor as well. So no reason to be scared of the matchup. Love Chris Carson in week 4.
And I just love Chris Carson in general. I said this during draft season. I feel like he's always underrated, undervalued, underappreciated. So, yeah, I definitely agree there. Now, a guy that is usually the opposite of underappreciated. We've been telling you for a while, including draft season, just avoid Bills running backs. Chris, hold on to your seat. I'm going to shock you here. I'm going with Zack Moss this week. And I get that he's not a guy you're going to start most weeks, but he did show a little something this past time. Like Devin Singletary, sometimes he looks good, sometimes he doesn't. He's been fumbling the ball. He's fumbled 3 times. Hasn't lost him yet, but eventually I think it's going to catch up with him. But Moss, when he's come in, he's been effective. He's the one getting the goal line touches, right? Getting touchdowns. He's got 3 touchdowns so far. Remember, he didn't even play in week 1. 2 touchdowns, 1 touchdown. So that helps you in your standard leagues because that offense, it looks like there's touchdowns to go around for everybody the way they're playing. And, oh, by the way, they get Houston this week. I know Houston hasn't been quite as bad as we expected. It's still not a good defense, all right? So don't fool yourself into thinking that they're a really good competitive team because they're not. And Zack Moss, when he played last week, 13 carries for 60 yards, pretty good. And, of course, he's getting more work as a receiver than Singletary. And, again, this offense, the way it's clicking and with the matchup that's on deck here for week 4, I go ahead and I roll out Moss if I have him because – again, we are seeing some semblance of a ceiling here because he's able to score. He's catching some passes. No, he's not going to carry the ball 20 times, but that's okay. How many running backs really are you looking at this point that are doing that anyway? So I kind of like me some Zack Moss this week. All right, Chris, let's see if you can top that.
I might, because I'm going to raise you a James Robinson of the Jaguars, who we all claimed, bust material after the first couple of weeks. But look, over the last 2 weeks, he's actually kind of taken that backfield over the way we expected with 14 touches in week 2 and then 21 touches here coming out of week 3 and now going against a Cincinnati defense, which, yeah, it's not as bad as it was last year, but it's still pretty bad. And this is a game where I know in a lot of games, Jacksonville has been in very negative game script. I know last week they made it competitive somehow with the Cardinals, but I think this will be another somewhat competitive game. I just don't think the Bengals offense, the way they run that offense there in Cincinnati, run heavy offense, not throwing it much. I just don't think it's a game where Cincinnati's just going to blow them out. So I think we're going to see tons of James Robinson again this week. And Cincinnati, not a defense to be scared of. I think you could plug James Robinson in as a high upside RB2 in week 4.
And, I'll take the L on Robinson. Last week, he had 2 duds, week 1 and 2. And I guess the Cardinals thought he would get scripted out. And somehow that didn't happen. The Jags actually held tough, and Robinson had a pretty nice game. So definitely wrong to call him a sit last week. But you did mention the Cardinals and game script. So that brings me to my last pick. That's Chase Edmonds. So we've talked about him. Not a super exciting guy. There's definitely a limit on his value. There's a ceiling. But sometimes you need a guy who can give you just, the right amount of points, those double digits. You feel like he's got the upside to score. So last week actually turned out to be James Conner week because they were playing the Jags, right? And eventually they got that lead. And then the second half, we saw Conner come in. Of course, he's getting the red zone carries. He did score those touchdowns. But he's not going to be a guy who's going to get heavy usage. Going against the Rams, we know what we expect in this game. That's fireworks, the passing game to be involved. So I feel like we're going to see a lot more Chase Edmonds. Of course, he's the passing down back. He's going to be the check down a lot of times because that Rams secondary is for real. So I feel like we're going to see more involvement by Edmonds. It's not a super high ceiling. Again, I'm not going to say that he's going to be a weak winner for you, but I like the fact that he is looking really good so far. He's going to get you a few catches, and I think this is a game where, kind of like we talked about with Nyheim Hines, script dependent. There are certain games you just feel like he's going to be involved. I feel like he's going to be definitely involved in this one. All right, those are our must-start running backs for week 4. We're also going to do this for wide receivers, so don't miss that video when it comes out. And again, check out the description, all the information down below. If you want to join our team, again, we're trying to build a community for everybody in fantasy football. You can be a part of it too. All right, thanks for watching.